Don't worry about the bills, sweetheart. I've got this. David's voice carried that particular tone. I'd grown to recognize over the past 6 months, gentle condescension wrapped in genuine affection, like a pat on the head disguised as a caress. He reached for the check at La Bernardine without even glancing at the total. His platinum American Express already between his fingers like a magic wand that could solve any problem money could touch. David, I can pay for my own dinner, I said quietly. But he was already handing the card to our server with that smile that had charmed Manhattan society pages for the better part of a decade. I know you can, Emma, but I want to take care of you. The words should have been romantic. Should have made me feel cherished, protected, loved. Instead, they settled in my stomach like stones, heavy and cold and impossible to digest. Because I knew what he really meant. I know you can't actually afford this, but I'm too polite to say so. Our server Marcus, according to his name tag, returned with the card and receipt. His expression carefully neutral in the way that expensive restaurant staff perfected. David signed with a flourish, adding what I was sure was a generous tip because David was always generous. Generosity was his defining characteristic, his most attractive quality, the thing that made everyone say what a good man he was. Ready? David stood and offered me his arm, and I took it because that's what you did when your boyfriend of 6 months treated you to dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. You smiled, you said thank you. You let him guide you through the dining room full of people who belonged there in a way you supposedly didn't. The October air was crisp as we stepped onto West 51st Street, and David immediately shrugged out of his jacket to drape it around my shoulders. Another gesture of care, another reminder of his thoughtfulness. Another small weight added to the growing pile of evidence that he saw me as a charity case rather than an equal. Cold? He asked, pulling me closer as we walked toward his waiting car, a black BMW that probably cost more than most people made in a year. A little. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was cold, but not from the weather. I was cold from the slow realization that the man I'd been falling in love with had been falling in love with someone who didn't actually exist. We should get you a proper coat, David said, his hand warm on my back as he guided me toward the car. Something cashmere. Camel-colored, maybe. It would look beautiful with your skin tone. I have a coat. I know, sweetheart. But you deserve something nice. Something that will keep you warm. The coat I was wearing was a vintage Burberry trench I'd found at a consignment shop in the Village. Classic, well-made, perfectly adequate for October in New York. But David had never seen it that way. To him, it was evidence of my circumstances. Proof that I needed rescuing. Another reason to feel good about himself for choosing to love someone less fortunate. His driver opened the door for us, and I slid into the leather interior that smelled like money and privilege and all the things David assumed I'd never had. As we pulled into traffic, he took my hand, threading our fingers together in a gesture that should have been intimate but felt more like ownership. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. My heart sank. Another gift. Another reminder of the power imbalance he seemed determined to maintain between us. Another beautiful thing I was supposed to be grateful for. Another gesture that said I can give you things you could never give yourself. The box was small, velvet, the kind that held serious jewelry. David's eyes were bright with anticipation as he placed it in my palm. And I could see how much he was enjoying this moment, the moment when he got to play the generous benefactor. The moment when I was supposed to gasp and tear up and tell him how wonderful he was. David, open it! Inside was a necklace. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in intricate pattern that probably cost more than most people's cars. It was beautiful, objectively, undeniably beautiful, and completely wrong for me in every way that mattered. It's gorgeous, I said, because it was true, and because I could see how much my reaction meant to him. I saw it and thought of you immediately. The sapphires match your eyes. He took the necklace from the box and moved to fasten it around my neck, his fingers gentle against my skin. There. Perfect. I caught my reflection in the car window, the diamonds glittering against my throat. The sapphires catching the streetlights as we moved through the city. I looked like someone else. Someone who belonged in David's world. Someone who could accept gifts like this without feeling like she was slowly disappearing. Thank you, I whispered, because what else could I say? How could I explain that every gift felt like another bar in a beautiful cage? Another reminder that he saw me as someone who needed saving rather than someone worth choosing. You don't have to thank me, Emma. You deserve beautiful things. But do I deserve them from you? I wanted to ask. Do I deserve them because you love me or because you feel sorry for me? Instead, I squeezed his hand and smiled, playing the role I'd been unconsciously auditioning for since the night we met, the grateful recipient of his largesse. The poor girl who'd won the lottery by catching the attention of David Whitmore, heir to a shipping fortune and one of New York's most eligible bachelors. The car pulled up to my building, a pre-war walk-up in the village that David had never actually been inside, though he'd dropped me off here dozens of times. He always offered to walk me up, and I always declined, claiming I didn't want to wake my neighbors. The truth was, I couldn't bear to see him catalog the modest space I called home. Couldn't stand to watch him add up the second-hand furniture and the small kitchen and the single bedroom and conclude that yes, he'd been right about my circumstances all along. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, leaning over to kiss me goodnight. His lips were warm, familiar, and I felt the same confusing mix of genuine affection and growing resentment that had been building for weeks. "Okay." "Emma?" He caught my hand as I moved to get out of the car. "I love you." The words hung between us like a question, like a test I wasn't sure how to pass. Because I loved him too, or I thought I did. But how could you love someone who didn't actually see you? How could you build a relationship with someone who'd fallen in love with their own generosity rather than with you? "I love you too," I said, because it was easier than explaining why those words felt more like a burden than a gift. I watched his car disappear into the night, then climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, the diamonds heavy around my neck like a beautiful chain. Inside, I set the necklace carefully on my dresser and stared at it in the lamplight. This gorgeous thing that represented everything wrong with my relationship. Tomorrow was my birthday. Tomorrow, David would probably have planned something elaborate and expensive. Another opportunity to demonstrate his ability to give me things I supposedly couldn't give myself. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to keep playing the role of the grateful poor girl, or whether to finally show him who I really was. The thought terrified me almost as much as it relieved me. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by my window overlooking Bleecker Street, watching the city settle into its late-night rhythm while the necklace caught moonlight from my dresser like a small constellation of guilt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face when he'd given it to me, the pure joy of someone who believed he was making dreams come true, who had no idea he was slowly suffocating the person he claimed to love. At 6 a.m., I made coffee and called in sick to work. I taught 3rd grade at a public school in Brooklyn, a job that David had never quite understood. "You could do anything," he'd said once, meaning it as encouragement. "You're so smart, so capable. You could work in publishing or museums or ... double quotes he'd trailed off. But I'd heard the unspoken end of that sentence. Or, you could just let me take care of you." The irony was that I loved teaching. Loved the chaos and the breakthroughs and the way 8-year-olds saw the world with such fierce clarity. But David saw it as evidence of my circumstances rather than my choices, another sign that I needed rescuing rather than supporting. My phone buzzed with a text. "Happy birthday, beautiful! Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight. We're something special." Something special. I looked at the necklace on my dresser, then at my closet full of clothes that David had never quite approved of. Not because they weren't nice, I had good taste and I'd learned to shop carefully, to invest in pieces that would last. But because they weren't expensive enough, weren't the kind of clothes that announced their price tags to anyone who knew how to look. I spent the morning walking through the village trying to clear my head, trying to figure out how to navigate the conversation I knew was coming. Because tonight, when David took me to whatever expensive restaurant he'd chosen for my birthday dinner, I was going to have to decide, keep pretending to be the person he thought I was, or risk losing him by showing him who I actually was. The problem was, I wasn't entirely sure who that person was anymore. 6 months of being treated like a charity case had a way of making you question your own worth, of making you wonder if maybe everyone else could see something you couldn't. I found myself standing outside the tenement museum, staring at the building that housed stories of immigrants who'd come to New York with nothing and built lives anyway. My great-grandmother had lived in a building just like this one, had worked 16-hour days in a garment factory to send money back to Ireland and save enough to bring her sisters over. She'd died when I was 12, but I still remembered her hands scarred from years of sewing, but gentle when she braided my hair and told me stories about the old country. "You come from strong women," she'd whispered to me the last time I saw her, her voice thin but fierce. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." I'd been feeling small for months. My phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. David's name flashed on the screen and I almost didn't answer. But guilt, That familiar companion made me pick up. "Emma, I've been thinking about tonight and I want to do something special. Really special. David, you don't have to. I want to. I've made reservations at Daniel, and I thought afterward we could go back to my place. I have something I want to show you." Daniel. One of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The kind of place where David belonged and where I would spend the entire evening feeling like an imposter. That sounds lovely, I heard myself say, because what else could I say? How could I explain that his generosity felt like a cage, that every expensive gesture made me feel smaller rather than more cherished? "Were the necklace I gave you last night." "And Emma? Yes? I love you. I hope you know how much." After he hung up, I stood on the sidewalk feeling like I was drowning in affection I couldn't quite trust. Because how could you trust love that was based on a fundamental misunderstanding? How could you build a future with someone who'd fallen in love with their own version of you? I walked home slowly, taking the long way through Washington Square Park, past the fountain where street musicians played for tourists and NYU students sprawled on benches with books and coffee. Normal people living normal lives, not having to navigate the complicated politics of dating someone who thought love meant rescue. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the letter I'd been carrying in my purse for 3 weeks, the letter from my father's lawyer, the one that had arrived exactly 1 month after the funeral. I'd read it so many times the paper was soft at the creases, but I still couldn't quite believe what it said. "Dear Ms. Chun, as per your father's instructions, I am writing to inform you that the trust fund established in your name has now been fully transferred to your control. The current value of the trust is approximately $3.2 million, comprised of investments, real estate holdings, and liquid assets. Your father was very specific that this information should not be shared with you until after his death, as he wanted you to build your own life and career without the influence of inherited wealth. He was, by all accounts, enormously proud of the woman you became. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the management of these assets. Sincerely, Robert Morrison, Esq. $3.2 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. More money than David probably assumed I'd ever seen. Money that my father, a quiet man who'd worked as a high school principal and lived modestly his entire life, had apparently been investing and saving for decades, never telling me, never letting on that he was anything other than middle class. The letter had arrived 2 weeks before I met David, but I'd been so overwhelmed by grief and shock that I'd barely processed it. By the time I'd started dating David, it had felt too late to mention it. How do you casually drop into conversation that you're actually wealthy? How do you explain that you've been letting someone treat you like a charity case when you could probably buy and sell them twice over? And now, 3 weeks later, it felt impossible. Because David's entire understanding of our relationship was built on the assumption that he was the successful one, the generous one, the one who could provide things I couldn't provide for myself. If I told him the truth now, it would unravel everything we'd built together. But maybe everything we'd built together needed to be unraveled. I looked at the necklace on my dresser, then at the letter in my hands, then at my reflection in the window. For the first time in months, I tried to see myself the way my father had seen me, not as someone who needed rescuing, but as someone who was already whole. The woman looking back at me was stronger than I'd given her credit for. She'd built a life she loved, chosen work that mattered to her, created a home that felt like sanctuary. She didn't need David's money or his protection or his expensive gestures, but she did need his respect. And she was tired of pretending she didn't deserve it. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my purse. Tonight, at Daniel, over whatever elaborate meal David had planned, I was going to tell him the truth. Not because I wanted to hurt him, not because I wanted to prove a point, but because I was tired of being loved for who I wasn't instead of who I was. The thought terrified me, but for the first time in months, it also made me feel like myself again. Daniel was exactly what I'd expected: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, servers who moved like dancers through a choreographed ballet of fine dining. David had requested a table by the window, and the city sparkled below us like a jewelry box, all lights and promise and expensive beauty. "You look stunning," David said as I sat down, his eyes immediately going to the necklace at my throat. "I knew those sapphires would be perfect on you." I've chosen my outfit carefully, a black dress I'd bought at Bergdorf's 2 years ago, before my father died, back when I'd occasionally splurged on something beautiful without thinking twice about the cost. David didn't know that, of course. To him, it was probably another piece of evidence that I'd stretched my budget to look appropriate for his world. Thank you. I touched the necklace briefly, feeling its weight. David, there's something I need to tell you. After dinner, he said quickly, signaling the sommelier. Tonight is about celebrating you. Everything else can wait. The wine he ordered cost more than most people spent on rent. I watched him taste it, nod approvingly, and smile at me across the table like he was giving me a gift just by including me in this moment. The familiar weight of gratitude settled on my shoulders, and I realized how tired I was of carrying it. "How's your day?" he asked, settling back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who'd orchestrated everything perfectly. "Quiet. I took the day off." "Good. You worked too hard." He reached across the table to take my hand. "You know, I've been thinking about that. About your job." Something in his tone made me go still. "What about it?" "Well, it's wonderful that you're so passionate about teaching. Really admirable. But Emma, you could do so much more. I have connections in publishing, in the art world. I could make some calls, set up some meetings. I like teaching, I know you do. But sweetheart, you're settling for less than you deserve. You're so intelligent, so cultured. You could be working at the Met, or Sotheby's, or any number of places where your talents would be properly appreciated. And properly compensated, I heard in the subtext. Places where you wouldn't need me to take care of you. What if I don't want to work at the Met?" David laughed, the indulgent laugh of someone who thought he understood me better than I understood myself. "Of course you do. You just don't think you're qualified. But Emma, you are. You just need someone to open the right doors for you." Our appetizers arrived. Something delicate and artfully arranged that probably cost more than my students' families spent on groceries in a week. I pushed it around my plate, my appetite disappearing as I watched David catalog my reactions, clearly pleased with himself for exposing me to such luxury. "I have something for you," he said as the server cleared our plates. "Another birthday surprise." "David, the necklace was enough. This is different." He pulled out an envelope, cream-colored and expensive-looking. "It's not jewelry. It's a future." I opened the envelope with shaking hands, already dreading what I might find inside. It was a lease agreement for an apartment on the Upper East Side, a one-bedroom with a doorman and a view of Central Park. The kind of place I could never afford on a teacher's salary. "I know it's presumptuous," David said quickly, misreading my shocked silence. "But Emma, your current place, it's not safe. It's not appropriate for someone like you. This apartment is in my building just 2 floors down from me. You'd be comfortable there, secure? And the rent, well, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it." I stared at the lease, at the monthly rent that was more than I made in 3 months, at David's signature already on the bottom as guarantor. He'd signed it without asking me, without even discussing it with me. He'd simply decided what was best for me and made it happen. "You signed a lease for me. I wanted to surprise you." "You signed a lease for an apartment I've never seen, in a building I didn't choose, and you're planning to pay for it. Emma, I can afford it. It's not a burden for me. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" For the first time, David looked genuinely confused. "I want to take care of you. I want to give you nice things, a safe place to live, a comfortable life. What's wrong with that?" "Everything," I wanted to say. "Everything is wrong with that." But instead, I folded the lease carefully and put it back in the envelope. "David, what do you think I do for work? You teach 3rd grade, and what do you think I make?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't know exactly. 40,000? 50? "Emma, it doesn't matter to me how much you make, doesn't it?" "Of course not. I have enough for both of us. And what do you think my life was like before I met you? I think." He paused, clearly trying to find a diplomatic way to phrase it. "I think you've had to work very hard for everything you have. I think you've had to be careful with money, careful with choices. I think you deserve better than that." "Better than what, exactly?" "Better than worrying about bills, better than shopping at thrift stores, better than living in a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that's not entirely safe." I looked at him across the table, this man I'd been falling in love with, this man who thought he was rescuing me, and realized that he'd never actually seen me at all. He'd seen a story he wanted to tell himself about his own generosity, a role he needed me to play in his narrative of benevolent wealth. "David," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the letter from my father's lawyer. My hands were steady as I unfolded it and placed it on the table between us. "Read this." David picked up the letter, his expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something that might have been shock as he read. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. $3.2 million. Yes, you're wealthy. Yes, and you never told me. No. The silence stretched between us, filled with the soft sounds of expensive dining crystal clinking, muted conversations, the whisper of servers moving through the room. David stared at the letter, then at me, then back at the letter. I don't understand, he said finally. What don't you understand? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me ? Why did you let me pay for everything? Why did you let me think ... that you were rescuing me? He flinched. That's not what I thought. Isn't it, Emma? I was trying to be generous. I was trying to show you how much I cared about you. By assuming I couldn't take care of myself, that's not... He stopped, ran his hands through his hair. You let me believe you needed my help. I never asked for your help. But you accepted it. Because I thought you were being kind. I thought you wanted to treat me, not rescue me. I thought the difference mattered to you. David picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. So this whole time you've been... what? Laughing at me? No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I've been falling in love with you while slowly realizing that you are falling in love with someone who doesn't exist. That's not true, isn't it? David, you just tried to rent me an apartment because you decided my current one wasn't good enough. You've been planning my career because you think my current job is beneath me. You buy me expensive jewelry and expensive dinners and expensive everything because you think I can't afford nice things for myself. I wanted to give you nice things. Why? Because I love you. Or because it made you feel good about yourself to be the generous one, the successful one, the one who could provide things I supposedly couldn't provide for myself. The question hung between us like an accusation. David's face had gone pale, and I could see him processing this new information, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the woman sitting across from him. So what now? He asked finally. Now you tell me, do you love me or do you love the idea of rescuing me? That's not fair. It's the only question that matters. David was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, uncertain. I don't know how to love someone who doesn't need me. The honesty in his admission broke my heart a little, because I could see it now, not malice, not manipulation, but genuine confusion. David had built his entire identity around being the provider, the protector, the one who solved problems with his wallet and his connections. He didn't know how to be in a relationship where he wasn't the hero. David, I said gently, I don't need you to rescue me, but I do need you to see me. I do see you. You see who you think I am. You see who you need me to be, but you don't see me. He looked at me then, really looked, and I could see him trying to reconcile 6 months of assumptions with this new reality. The woman across from him wasn't the grateful recipient of his largesse. She was his equal financially, intellectually, in every way that mattered. And he had no idea how to love an equal. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm so sorry, Emma. I never meant to make you feel small. I know you didn't. Can we... Can we start over? Can we try again, knowing what we know now? I looked at this man I thought I loved, this man who'd thought he loved me, and realized that we'd both been in love with illusions. The question was whether there was anything real underneath all the misunderstandings, anything worth salvaging from the wreckage of our assumptions. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if you can love someone you can't rescue. And I don't know if I can love someone who needs me to be less than I am. The truth settled between us like a verdict, final and irrevocable. David excused himself to the restroom, leaving me alone at our table with the letter, the lease agreement, and the weight of 6 months of misunderstandings. I watched him walk away, shoulders straight, movements controlled, and realized he was probably trying to process the complete reorganization of his worldview in the space of a bathroom break. The server approached discreetly. Is everything all right, miss? Fine, thank you. I managed to smile. Could I have the check, please? Of course. Though I believe the gentleman, I'll be taking care of it tonight. When David returned, his face was composed, but his eyes were red-rimmed. He'd been crying, I realized, and the knowledge made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Not pity exactly, but something close to it. Emma, I've asked for the check. You don't need to. He stopped himself, the automatic response dying on his lips as he remembered what he'd just learned. Right. Of course. The server brought the check discreetly, placing it equidistant between us. David's eyes went to it automatically, his hand starting to reach for his wallet before he caught himself. The gesture was so ingrained, so unconscious, that I realized how deep this pattern went for him. I placed my credit card on the check without looking at the total. It was a small gesture, but I could see it land like a physical blow. David sat back in his chair, watching me handle something he'd never allowed me to handle before. "This is surreal," he said quietly. "Which part? All of it? Sitting here watching you pay for dinner at Daniel? Realizing that you could probably buy this restaurant if you wanted to? Knowing that every time I've picked up a check, every time I've bought you something, you've been ... what? Humoring me, not humoring you. Letting you express affection the only way you seem to know how. God." He put his head in his hands. "I'm such an ass." "You're not an ass, David. You're just ... limited." He looked up at that, something sharp flashing in his eyes. "Limited? You only know how to love down. You only know how to care for someone who needs caring for. You've never learned how to love an equal. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me about your last relationship." David was quiet for a moment, and I could see him thinking, cataloging. "Rebecca. She was an artist. Struggling. I helped her get gallery showings, bought her supplies, paid for her studio space. And before her? Sarah. She was in graduate school, working 3 jobs to pay tuition. I helped with her expenses, made sure she could focus on her studies. And before her? Emma, what's your point?" "My point is that you have a type, David, and it's not successful women. It's women who need saving." The words hung between us like an indictment. David's face cycled through expressions: denial, anger, recognition, shame. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That doesn't make me a bad person, no, it doesn't, but it makes you someone who can't love me. Not really. Not as I actually am. I can learn. Can you really? Can you love someone who doesn't need your money, your connections, your protection? Can you love someone who might make more money than you, who might be more successful than you, who might be the one taking care of you sometimes?" The questions landed like challenges, and I could see David wrestling with them, trying to imagine a relationship where he wasn't the dominant partner, where his value wasn't measured by his ability to provide. "I want to try," he said finally. "Do you? Or do you want to try? What's the difference?" "The difference is that wanting to try means you're willing to do the work to change. Want to try means you think you should change, but you're not actually willing to do it." David picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. "How do I know which one it is?" "You don't. That's the point. You have to decide if you're willing to find out." Our server returned with my credit card and receipt. I signed it quickly, adding a generous tip, aware that David was watching every movement like he was studying a foreign language. "Emma," he said as I put my card away, "I need to ask you something." "What? Why didn't you tell me? From the beginning, why didn't you just tell me you had money?" I considered the question, trying to find words for something I'd barely understood myself, because I wanted to see if you could love me without it. I wanted to know if you could see value in me that wasn't financial, and you couldn't. Every time you looked at me, you saw someone who needed fixing, someone who needed elevating, someone who needed you to make her life better. You never saw someone who was already whole, but you weren't being honest with me. No, I wasn't. But David, I was being myself. The money doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change that I love teaching, that I live modestly, that I value experiences over things. It just means I choose those things instead of having them chosen for me by circumstance. So you were testing me. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. David leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. So what happens now? Now we decide if there's anything real underneath all the assumptions we've been making about each other. And how do we do that? We start over. Completely over. We pretend we just met and we see if we actually like each other when we're not playing roles. What if we don't? Then we don't. And we'll both be better off knowing it. David was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. More honest. "I'm scared," he said. "Of what?" "Of finding out that I don't know how to love someone who doesn't need me. Of discovering that my entire understanding of relationships is built on inequality. And I'm scared of finding out that you can't love me as I actually am. That you need me to be less than you in order to feel good about yourself. So we're both scared. Yes, but you're willing to find out anyway. I'm willing to find out. The question is, are you? David looked at me across the table, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since we'd met. I could see him trying to reconcile the woman he'd thought he knew with the woman sitting in front of him, trying to imagine a relationship built on equality instead of rescue. I don't know if I can do it, he said finally. I don't know if I know how. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 6 months. Is it enough? I considered the question, looking at this man who'd thought he was saving me, who'd just discovered he might be the one who needed saving. It's a start. What's the next step? The next step is we leave here and we don't see each other for a month. We both think about what we actually want, what we're actually willing to give and receive. And then, if we both decide we want to try, we start over. No assumptions, no roles, no rescue fantasies. Just 2 people seeing if they actually like each other. A month? A month. No calls, no texts, no contact. Just time to figure out who we are when we're not performing for each other. David nodded slowly, and I could see him processing this, trying to imagine a month without the comfortable dynamic we'd established. And if, after a month, one of us decides it won't work, then we say goodbye with gratitude for what we learned about ourselves, and if we both want to try, then we start the hardest work either of us has ever done, learning how to love someone as they actually are instead of as we need them to be. David reached across the table and took my hand, and for the first time in months, his touch felt like connection instead of possession. "Happy birthday, Emma," he said quietly. "Thank you. For what it's worth, I think you're extraordinary. Money or no money, you're extraordinary. For what it's worth, I think you could be too, if you let yourself." We sat there for another moment, holding hands across the table, 2 people who'd just discovered they'd been strangers to each other all along. Then David signaled for our coats, and we walked out of Daniel together, into the October night that felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. 31 days later, I was sitting in the same coffee shop where David and I had first met, watching the door and wondering if he would show up. We'd agreed to meet here if we both decided to try a game-neutral territory, no expensive restaurants or power dynamics, just coffee and conversation and the possibility of something real. I'd spent the month thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years, about what I wanted from love, from partnership, from life. I'd gone back to work, thrown myself into teaching with renewed energy, spent time with friends I'd been neglecting. I'd also met with my father's financial advisor and started making plans for the money, foundation for educational programs, investments in teacher training, ways to use my inheritance that would have made my father proud. The month had been clarifying in ways I hadn't expected. Without David's constant presence, without the weight of his assumptions about my life, I'd remembered who I was when I wasn't performing gratitude. I was someone who liked her own company, who had strong opinions about art and politics and education, who could take care of herself and others with equal competence. I was someone worth loving for who she was, not who she needed. The question was whether David had come to similar realizations. At exactly 3 o'clock, he walked through the door. He looked different, less polished, more uncertain. He was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, and his hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was tentative, nervous. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Hi, you look good. Thank you. So do you." We sat in awkward silence for a moment, 2 people who'd been intimate for 6 months, suddenly feeling like strangers, which, I supposed, we were. "How was your month?" I asked. Illuminating, uncomfortable, necessary. He signaled the barista for coffee. "Yours?" "The same." "Emma, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I went to therapy." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Really. I found someone who specializes in relationship patterns, and I've been seeing her twice a week. It's been eye-opening." "What did you learn?" David was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I learned that you were right. I do have a type, and it's women who need saving. I learned that I've been using generosity as a way to maintain control, to ensure that I'm always the more powerful person in the relationship. That must have been hard to hear. It was devastating, but it was also liberating in a weird way. Because once I understood the pattern, I could start to change it. Can you change it? I don't know. But I want to try. Really try. Not just want to try. The barista brought David's coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the mug like he was anchoring himself. I also need to apologize. Not just for the assumptions I made about you, but for the way I made you feel small. For treating you like a charity case instead of a partner. Thank you. And I need to ask you something. Do you think it's possible for someone to fundamentally change the way they approach relationships? Do you think someone can learn to love differently? I considered the question, thinking about the month I'd spent rediscovering myself. Thinking about the work it had taken to unlearn patterns I'd been carrying for years. I think it's possible, I said finally, but I think it's the hardest work a person can do. And I think it requires being willing to be uncomfortable for a long time while you figure out new ways of being. Are you willing to be uncomfortable? Are you? I think so. I hope so. David leaned forward, his expression earnest. Emma, I want to know you. Really know you. Not the version of you I created in my head, but the actual you. I want to know what you think about when you're alone, what makes you laugh, what pisses you off, what you dream about. What if you don't like what you find? Then at least I'll know the truth, and you'll know the truth about me, which is that I'm someone who's been so afraid of not being needed that I've never learned how to simply be wanted, that I've confused providing with loving, rescuing with caring. That I've been so busy trying to be the hero that I've never learned how to be a partner. The honesty in his voice made something tight in my chest loosen. David? Yeah? Want to know you too. The real you, not the generous benefactor you've been performing. I want to know what scares you, what you're passionate about, what you want that has nothing to do with taking care of someone else. What if I don't know the answers to those questions? Then we'll figure them out together. David smiled then. And it was different from any smile I'd seen from him before, and certain but genuine, vulnerable but hopeful. So where do we start? He asked. We start with coffee. Just coffee. We sit here and talk like two people getting to know each other for the first time. What do we talk about? Anything. Everything. What you wanted to be when you grew up. Your worst fear. Your favorite book. The last time you cried. The last time I cried was a month ago, in the bathroom at Daniel, when I realized I'd been in love with someone who didn't exist. The last time I cried was 2 weeks ago, when I was going through my father's things and found a letter he'd written me that I was supposed to get on my wedding day. What did it say? That he hoped I'd find someone who loved me for my strength, not despite it. Someone who saw me as a partner, not a project. Smart man, he was. We sat there drinking coffee and talking, really talking for 3 hours. I learned that David had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, before his father convinced him that business was more practical. I learned that his worst fear was being alone, which explained so much about his need to be needed. I learned that he'd read Jane Eyre 6 times and cried every time Rochester went blind. He learned that I'd been writing a novel for 2 years, that I was terrified of publishing it because it would mean putting myself out there in a way I'd never done before. He learned that I'd been in love with him not because of his generosity, but because of the way he listened when I talked about my students. The way he remembered small details about my life. The way he made me feel seen in moments when he forgot to be the rescuer. Emma, he said as the coffee shop started to empty around us, I have a confession. What? I'm terrified that I don't know how to do this. How to be in a relationship where I'm not the one with all the power. I'm terrified that I don't know how to let someone love me without performing. Gratitude for it. So we're both terrified, yes. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being terrified means we're doing something real for the first time. David reached across the table and took my hand. And this time his touch felt like a question instead of an answer, like an invitation instead of a claim. Emma? Yes. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere casual, somewhere we can split the check and just ... see what happens. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd like that very much. Good. And Emma? Yes? Thank you. For what? For seeing me clearly enough to know I needed saving too. We left the coffee shop together, walking out into the November afternoon that felt like possibility, like the beginning of something neither of us could predict or control. For the first time since we'd met, we were just two people who liked each other, who wanted to see what might grow between them if they tended it carefully, honestly, without rescue fantasies or performance or the weight of assumptions. It wasn't the love story either of us had expected. But it was real and it was ours, and it was enough. Love, I realized, wasn't about saving or being saved. It was about seeing and being seen, choosing and being chosen, building something together that neither person could build alone.